Welcome to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Levere, and join me as we talk to other knife makers and craftsmen about anything and everything knives. Thank you for listening in again to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Levere, and I am joined by special guest Steve Johnson. For anybody who doesn't know who Steve Johnson is, his contributions towards knife making or his living legacy, I really encourage you to look him up, but also shame on you. Steve Johnson is a pioneer of a lot of techniques in the knife making world and has really changed the face of fine knife making, I would argue, in the modern knife making era. So, Steve, it's really good to have you here.
Pleasure to talk to you.
So, for everybody who doesn't know about you or hasn't read the numerous publications that are about you, can you talk a little bit about you, what got you into knives, and just generally more you as a person outside of knives?
Sure. I grew up in Manti, Utah. That's Manti. It's pronounced Manti, not Manti. Though I met a man in Europe who lived in Manti. It's a town in Italy, so I guess you can pronounce it anyway. Grew up on a farm, hauling hay and raising beef cattle. We'd take them on the mountain every spring and bring them down every fall. That was a good life. Hunting, fishing within 2 or 3 miles of our house, and of course pheasants out on the farm. That's no longer happening. All the cement ditches and the sprinkler irrigation have eliminated the ditch banks. Be that as it may, we had a good life and enjoyed the outdoors. And church was a big part of our life, of course, in these little Mormon towns. So Utah's a great place. If you don't like snow, we've had record snow this year, and I even got a bit tired of it. I usually like the winter, but shoveling snow gets old after 6 or 8 months. As far as hobbies, like I say, hunting and fishing, outdoors, pretty much anything, four-wheeling, camping, such. My wife's a tennis player, a darn good one, but she hasn't taught me how to be even slightly decent yet. Got some kids that were state champions in tennis. So. And we have 7 kids, 4 boys, 3 girls. They're all great kids. They all have families now, and they're going along doing their lives. Mainly because of my wife. And we've had a successful business a great deal because of my wife. There's a lot more to knife making than grinding and sawing and polishing, and that's in the business end of it. She has been there all the time. There aren't many years our accountant hasn't said, these are the best records I get every year. And she's just totally perfect on financial deal. She's an elementary school teacher. She hasn't been trained in finance, but she understands it. Wonderful. Steve Johnson wouldn't have gone far without her. And looking back, I wouldn't have wanted to go far without her. She's been the blessing of my life and our family's life, and I appreciate and love her. Super woman, super wife, super mother, super saint as far as our beliefs are concerned. And
That's good. So did she come to, or had when you're doing knife shows regularly, did she come to knife shows a lot with you?
Virtually all of them. Of course, if there was a new child or something that needed care or illness, or as a rule, she was there and our children were there too. We traveled the country and to in some ways, the world with our kids. We remember a time in Paris that I don't think our child was more than a year and a half, still in a stroller. We didn't have a stroller. We went to one of the knife shops in town, and the lady that ran it, I can't remember her name, but we'll always remember her going in the back of the store into her apartment and bringing out a stroller for us. It was right across the street from the opera. It was our kids sometimes were the stars at the shows more than not. So as a rule, she was with me and a great support. My wife from the Dalles, Oregon. She was born in Utah, but her father went to the Dalles to serve as a technical consultant for an aluminum plant up there. And she lived there most of her life there. We met at BYU in 1974.
So, did your exposure to knives come from being in the outdoors and farming a lot, or where exactly were your interests with knives early on, or was that something that came later in life?
I didn't like collect knives or anything. You used one daily. You had a pocket knife. Of course, hunting and fishing, you had to have a knife. But I wasn't, you know, I didn't ever want to be a knife maker. I'd never heard of one. There were probably 7 knife makers anyone had heard of in the 1960 era, and it just happened that Gil Hibben moved into town, and immediately the day I saw one of his custom made home handmade knives, I was interested in knives. So it wasn't something that was of great interest all my life. Of course, knives are fun to use and whittle with and such. And I wasn't into them as far as making them at all until I was 1965, I guess.
Yeah. So, what did that look like? So, Gil moved in, and you, what did you start making things in his shop, or like what was your early making experience? Like, what did your first knife look like, and kind of what got you into it?
Yeah, our church, with along with many organizations, churches, fire departments, police departments, whatever, had the Boy Scout troops, and I was of the age of Explorer Scout at the time, and he was in our ward or parish, you may call it, and the bishop called him to be our explorer advisor, or basically the scoutmaster for 16, 18-year-old boys. And part of their program was to expose the boys to occupations, various occupations, get them interested in their next step in life, going to work, go to see doctors or dentists or fire department or whatever, lawyers, whatever occupations were in the area, farmers. And he said, "Well, we just as well go down to the shop and see what I do for a living." And we had heard that, this guy came into town and made knives. I think he arrived in 63, possibly 64. And we also heard that he was charging $40 for a knife. And we also, everyone thought he was crazy. You could get that for a knife. You could buy a Boker or a Schrade or a whatever at the hardware store for $7 or for the good ones, and $40 was crazy. But he took us down, showed us how he made knives, and showed us his work. And I didn't have $40, but I was immediately thinking of a way to get it, whether I had to get a job or whatever, beg it from my parents. I was going to get one of those knives. And he was a great guy. He wanted to work with the boys, and he told us, well, if you'd like to, you can come to the shop and make a knife for yourself, which 5 or 6 of us did. And there were 2 or 3 that finished them. I helped a friend finish his, but Gil could see that, well, I would sleep with my knife, whatever stage it was in, on the bedstand next to my bed. I was looking at it all the time. I was enthralled literally with knife making and the product. And he, that wouldn't happen these days with OSHA around, but he let us choose the equipment, and he was forging. Actually, you possibly may know he was forging 440C at the time. I think he was the first one to do that. And with success, my hunting knife that I made was forged from a bar of 440C. And I have cleaned and skinned 3 deer with that knife at one time, and it would still catch hair on my arm after that work. Anyway, he could tell that it was obvious that I liked knives, and he actually was new in town. Nobody was there that could work with him. And in time, actually, between the time we met and the time I went to work after school, Buster Warenski worked there a little bit, I believe, as did Harvey Draper. Maybe it was just Harvey. Anyway, Harvey was very talented, as everyone knows who knows of him. And he left and opened his own shop. And Buster may have just worked with Harvey. I'm not sure, but they were both influenced by Hibben. Anyway, he asked me if I'd like to work after school, which I did. Jumped at the chance for a year or so. I can't remember how old I was, 17, 18. I'd go down there after school or on a Saturday if I had the chance and work with him. He hired a friend of mine, David Lyman, a schoolmate, who worked there also. At one time, he had four helpers, I think, in his shop, including me. And while I was there, I made 3 or 4 knives plus a 24-inch short sword, which was forged again out of a 2-inch or 1.5-inch round bar of 440C. It's still hanging together, so I guess it was a pretty good forging job. I haven't ever chopped down a tree with it or anything though. And I made a big Bowie knife and 2 or 3 other fighters, a dagger. Anyway, I owe a lot to him for getting me going. It was quite a trail he set me on. Anyway, he left town in time, and I went and worked with Harvey Draper while I was at Snow College for a couple of years. There's more to that story. I don't know if you want to hear all that. It takes 2 or 3 hours. It'll take a few minutes anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're more than welcome to share what you would like. I mean, this is for the sake, I think, that I have to iterate this often, as talking to people like you. This might be one of not many interviews that we get to retain from you historically, right? And and it is one of my goals to be able to document like your journey through knives and what is important to you to share with posterity's sake. So even though, like, obviously I have 1.5 million questions for you, the things that I'm most interested in are the things that happen organically. So if you'd like to share about your work with Harvey Draper, I think it's a good segue into what my next question would be is, your experience, like what got you into working with Loveless and everything.
Well, that's got to be said probably then.
Yeah, so I think probably, yeah, I think talking about Harvey would be great next, and then we can get into Loveless.
Well, I worked with Harvey and his boy Bart for probably 1.5 years while I was in school, and I think I was more interested in knife making than school because my grades weren't that great, and that was a great experience. Both of those men are very talented, super skills in their hands and in their brain, and it was great to. They showed me lots of things that they had developed that Gil hadn't. Every knife maker has his own ways of doing things. Some of them great, some of them not so great, but worked with them that time, and probably 68-ish. That would have been 69. A guy came into the shop and was going to watch Harvey make him 2 knives. He wanted to buy them, but he also wanted to watch him make them because he wanted to make knives. So Harvey did. I don't know if Rod Chappel actually did any work or not, but he took good records and paid very close attention. You've seen his work. It's pretty amazing in its own way. Anyway, he came to the shop and we hit it off. He liked guns, and this is the country where everybody has a gun. Well, at that time they did anyway. And we went out calling coyotes one night and called in a red fox. Didn't shoot him, but we hit it off. And a little while later, he called me and said, "Steve, I want you to come up here and work in my shop." He had talked to the SBA and Small Business Administration, and had his loan approved. He was a full blood Eskimo, I believe, and not full blooded, half. But everything was approved. He went in to get his money, and they said, "Well, how long have you been making knives?" He said, "Oh, I've never made a knife." They said, "What?" He said, "I haven't made a knife. I'm going to. That's what this is all about." And they said, "Well, we can't give you any money. You need to have somebody in that shop that knows a little bit about knife making." So he called me and said, "Come, I want you to come up and be in my shop and help me to get things going," which I did finally, and got to Spokane, and his shop wasn't set up yet even, but he got a little place just the right size and everything out toward Airway Heights is where it was. It was 5 or 10 miles, 7 miles out of town. I worked with him, and we had a good relationship, but I had met and talked with A.G. Russell more than once through the years. We left Spokane because A.G. called and said, "I hear you're looking. I'm just wondering if you'd like to work with a guy out in California." And I said, "Oh, maybe." And so I flew down to L.A. and met with Bob, and he put me up in a little motel and worked with him a week. And actually, he went to Las Vegas for the weekend, left me a pile of knives and said, "I want you to grind those and taper the tangs, and while I'm gone," which I did. He came back and he said, "Well, you obviously know what you're doing." Go get your stuff, which I did. And got to Spokane in 1971. And don't check all these dates. I'm a little bit over the hill. 70, 71. And even brought my dog down there. His wife didn't love it, so it didn't last too long. But not sure that was a smart thing to do anyway, because I couldn't have it in my apartment. It had to be in Bob's yard. Anyway, he was great. He treated me like a son. And, you know, he's the reason I have a name, I think. Took me to shows and eventually ended up putting both of our names on the knives. And we'd go shooting. He loved photography, loved pistols. You may have seen the Model 41 Smith & Wesson 22 target pistol that he modified and call it a camp gun or a what. Anyways, a 3/4 size, but by the time it was through, little camp pistol. And I almost got one of them, but it didn't work out that way. However, the day I got there, I knew I wanted to stay because what he was showing me was exactly what I thought a knife should be. I just hadn't ever thought it up or seen it before. Drop point hunter. And before I had been there a week, he gave me a drop point with full wrap brass tang, beautiful stag out of that special melt steel, checkered top and bottom for the thumb and finger, and a beautiful sheath with the wraparound front stitched, kind of cowboy look. And we did great. Although I think we both got tired of each other by the time I left. That was 1974. I was going home for the deer hunt, and a drunk driver hit me head on and near Mesquite, Nevada, and put me in the hospital for 3 weeks. I was unconscious for 3 days and should have been killed, but the Lord was with me. I pulled onto the freeway out of Logandale, strapped on my seatbelt, reached over to grab my shoulder belt, and thought, "Nah, don't hook that up." In the accident, the steering wheel went from its position clear to the rear window. There was maybe 2 or 3 inches space between the steering wheel and the window. Because I didn't have a shoulder strap on, I was thrown sideways over toward the radio, and it went up over me. Didn't hurt me, but it did have a broken pelvis and concussion, etc. I was knocked out by the stick shift knob. Still got a dent in my head here, but anyway, I was blessed to live through that. It happened that Henry Frank had come to the shop to talk about knives, and of course, Bob was selling his knives from our catalog. Every time he'd see me, he'd say, "Steve, you got to open your own business." So when I got home, and a year later, after I'd recovered, that's what I did. Got married and started making knives, thanks to Buster and his help there, and Frank's, Henry's encouragement. And here we are, 40 years later or so.
Hey, there's a lot missing in between. Yeah, there's a lot missing in between that, right? But
oh yeah,
something that you think about Buster, A.G. Russell, Bob Loveless, and you, right? I mean, I there's to a lot of people, there's not a lot that you guys are giants, right? And
some of them are, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, arguably all of you are. Like, I don't know. Like, you're talking to a different generation of knife maker too, and you guys are like, I mean, I see everyone. Everybody wants to replicate your work.
Many have never heard of some of the guys we've mentioned. You know, it's a different generation.
Yeah, and well, that's what's interesting too, is because when I think of like pioneers of knives, there's a lot of people that don't know who Bob Loveless was.
Oh yeah,
but they replicate his knives all the same. And what's interesting is there is a lot of mystique, I guess, around the Loveless shop, and what came out of it, how work was done, everything like that. But when you got there, when Bob invited you down and everything, what was it like? I mean, was it your impression of the work? Was it just going and making knives for another knife maker, or what was the attitude, or the I guess the atmosphere around working with Bob at the time? Did it seem like a really, really great opportunity, or did it just seem like another job at the time?
Oh, I didn't know he was who he was yet. I don't know if he was who he was yet. Uh, he treated, like I say, he treated me like a son. I wasn't the employee, unless we had a little stress now and then, which is rare. But I was a partner, even though it wasn't said so. He certainly would do things his way, but his way of doing things seldom, if ever, didn't agree with. I didn't. I didn't agree with. From the design work to the fabrication, he had things figured out. We would take the bars of steel and scribe the patterns on, go down to a commercial knife manufacturing place I think it was in Downey or Compton, and make straight cuts with their shear. We'd make one angle on the butt of the knife, where that angle is, and a cut from the top of the back of the handle up toward the point. That'd be two cuts, and we'd cut the angle for where the curve comes up to the point. There might have been four cuts. That would take a minute or two. Then we'd take them back and grind them to outline, which would take another 2 or 3 minutes. I mean, that's pretty fast knife cutting out. And when I got there, he pointed to some bars of steel laying in the driveway there, a bit rusty. So that's this new steel I'm going to try out, and that was 154 cm. So it wasn't long before we were cutting knives out of that and trying to make a knife out of them. We assumed you couldn't polish it, but because they were 60 Rockwell heat treated. So the early ones had a kind of a, I don't know if we used Scotch Brite or just left a 400, 600 grit belt finish on it, but not too long before we were polishing them and found that it wasn't that bad to do. His heat treater, Art Jekyll in Downey steel treating, the first batch he didn't get hard. We went back down and talked about it, and he said, and the cryo treatment was brought up, and he said, "Oh, I didn't bother doing that. That can't do any good." And so he ran them through again. They came out just right. I don't know if that was the only thing he wasn't doing, but it was kind of exciting to have a stainless steel knife at 60 Rockwell, and uh, the only ones that had it. He had lots of dealings with the Japanese eventually, and of course, ATS 34 was an offshoot from that. He worked with went to the Hitachi steel plant and talked with them about getting that steel made. And it, in my opinion, was cleaner than the Crucible 154 at that time. It seemed like they went from really nice and beautiful to didn't seem to care about it that much. But I'm not a metallurgist, and I don't want to badmouth Crucible because I'm still using their steel. And they've always been great with me.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's fair, especially during the time that to make the assessment that a steel manufacturer in the spirit of increasing productivity in producing their steel that there is some quality control that's lost, right? I mean,
Well, it's possible.
yeah.
I know that many times that you'd hear that this ATS was cleaner.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also remember that too from a few older knife makers where they were saying that, it depended on where the ore was from and what the process was that was being used and everything. Like it's almost as much conjecture as it is actually what happened. But I remember that there's a back and forth over the years of in the 70s and 80s over cleaner or dirtier steel. And like whether that's actually directly related to Crucible's quality control process or not, I don't know. But I mean, if you think about it,
Could have been the man in charge, like for this 5-year period, we've got him doing it, and he wants to make money. Period.
yeah,
Whatever. Conjecture is the correct word because of course, I use CPM now, but when I see and use, I bought some of Herm Schneider's 154, and it was probably made in the 80s, and I never had a problem with that at all, or a concern, or thought that, oh, this is dirty, So, be that as it may, it's a long time ago.
yeah, for sure. I mean, with powdered metallurgy today, I think that there's a really strong argument for the homogeneous nature of it. I've actually really enjoyed geeking out a little bit with Laren Thomas and all the different research and development he's done around steel and metallurgy. Devin Thomas's son, and I was speaking to, I think, Matt Martin up in Michigan about that, and how the heat treating book that Laren Thomas made is provided way more data than we ever had on heat treating, right? I mean, because it used to be specific to the manufacturer of that, and people would kind of guess around at what produced the best results. But he went through and built all of these different test subjects around it. What does it do with or without cryo? How do you get the most out for what kind of equipment you have? But it's a lot different than being the exclusive of like a ATS or whatever, or like Bob was, back in the day when heat treating and whether you could get a 60 plus Rockwell was even possible. I mean, it's come a long way in that amount of time.
Well, you could get it, you just couldn't get it that wouldn't fracture and chip. Whatever. What was I going to say? Even these days, you buy a D2 hunting knife that may not have been made in the U.S., or the steel wasn't made here, or whatever, and it's not the D2 that custom makers use, it seems like. Doesn't hold an edge like real stuff. I don't know where that comes from. Maybe that's just guesswork too, and gossip. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, so kind of on the note of Loveless and everything, I guess what were some of the things that you took from your time working with him that you carried on in your own knife making. I mean, I know you touched on the drop point hunter being like the quintessential blade design, but I mean, what other things played a role in you moving on your own and what you've done since then with your own knife making?
Well, an obvious thing was he gave me probably enough materials for 20 to 50 knives when I left, be it blade steel or stag or hardwoods and handle screws and guard material. That kind of helped me get going. And of course, I've stuck with his designs. There are many knives out there with my name on them that are not Loveless designs, but that was for custom orders. And if someone wants me to make him a knife, it's a Loveless, just because I love him, and loved him. The production, he'd like to do 10 or 20 at a time, and I can do 5. That's about all I can. I would rather change jobs, grind on some blades and maybe polish one or two, and then put a couple guards on and finish a handle or assemble a handle. That could all happen in a day. Whereas there, I'd grind knives all day long for 2 or 3 days perhaps, and polish them for that much also. Then we'd put the guards on, and he soldered I think I soldered maybe 3 blades while I was there. I watched him solder every one. Then when they were soldered and the fillet polished, which I'd do, I'd start assembling, and he'd start the sheaths. When I got them assembled, he would rough shape them, which a rough shape for Loveless about 80 to 90% done, And but I'd go to file and sand strips. From there on, while he finished the sheaths, and around the time I got the knives done, he'd be fitting the sheaths up, and we'd be ready to etch them. And at that time, we used Kodak Metal Etch Resist KMER, which ultimately probably took 10 minutes per blade to get a logo on it. And that's what I used when I got to Manti for a year or two, until the Yancey boys. No, it wasn't them. Who was it? Yeah, it was. I believe it was them who showed me the stencil electro etch setup or process. And that was it. From then on, it takes maybe a minute, if you don't have any problems, to get your logo on. Then he probably 3/4 of the time I was there, he would then sharpen the blades on the belt with a 400 grit belt, get the burr on the edge, and then I would go to an oil stone and put the final edge on by hand. Eventually, we got to the point where we'd belt them and then buff it off, like I still do now, and most of my knife makers do, I think. I still don't go to work before noon hardly, and most of my years I would quit at 9 or 10 o'clock at night. With Bob, it was 10 or 11 or 12. We seldom went to get work before 10 or 11 or 12 o'clock in the morning. It's because we were tired. Often we'd run around. Living in LA, you don't have to have anything mailed to you hardly. You just go pick it up from my cart at the buffing compound, to leather, to steel, to we never bought solder. We did. we had the eutectic rep would deliver it for, well, maybe a while. Then we'd get it from one of the suppliers in the area, but we were on the road a lot, which wasted time, but also gave us a break too. I always stop at Cole's Sporting Goods in Inglewood and look at the guns. Always. There was a camera store in where was it? Not Compton, but toward down that way. If we were in the area, we'd always go in and look at the newest cameras. Bob loved cameras. King Gun Works, he had them do some of the work on that modified 22 and some 45 automatics. We bought two national match Colt 45s, and then he would cut off the barrel, machine ventilated ribs on the top, modify the handle a little bit, and King Gun Works did some of that work too. But typical day would involve some road work just about all the time.
What so I mean, you went out on your own, and I mean, there's a lot of history from the time that you went on your own to where we're at today. I mean, what were some things that you found fascinating about that journey in time? Things like individual works that you've done that were challenging, things like that. Like, I mean, it's really kind of difficult to pick apart, that many years and highlights on it. But do you have any very memorable like times of when you were out on your own?
It was a great job for a dad. Kids are 30 yards away from you all day, or in the backyard whenever they were around, after school or before weekends, whatever. We really enjoyed the people in the knife business, and have some great friends in this United States and Italy and Japan and Germany and France. Certainly enjoyed those times. My wife, after the kids got in school, went to work, and so we couldn't go to Germany and spend a week. She had to be back basically the next Monday or Tuesday. But that was okay, because you can do a lot in the weekend, 4 or 5 days, depending on how soon you left for your destination. But great people. We've got some great friends all over the world. Appreciate them. Meet guys at knife shows have 2 tables. One is for his knives, and one is for nothing but candy. And that made our children happy. Grandchildren. That was amazing to sit next to you that one weekend.
Yeah,
in Atlanta.
Well, what's funny about that is, well, for one, the other table was a buddy of mine. We actually don't live that far away, but he works on movie sets, and so he had to get his time in with the guild and everything, or the union, right? And so he went out, I think it was to California or somewhere, and he was like, "Man, like I had all my knives set up. I'll be able to fly in, but like and just display for the time there. But it got real close, and I was about ready to take his display out and everything, and just pack it with my stuff. And he was like, if I miss 3 days here, I'm missing a lot of money, more than I can speculatively make at a knife show. He's like, I really gotta stay. I gotta stay here. And I was like, all right, bud. Well, we'll find out something to do with it. And so but probably more than I made at the show in candy, and that made everybody happy. So, but one thing that impressed me a lot is I had never met you, but your work is iconic, and so I knew it, but I saw all these people coming up and shaking your hand and talking with you, taking pictures and everything, and I'm sure there's probably like 30 photos of customers and fans of yours where I'm in the back just looking at them, wondering what's going on here, just floating around. But when I actually got to talk to you and everything, I was like, oh my God, like that's SR Johnson, right? And I, talking through everything, and I was getting into the guild and everything too, and it was my first knife show out of state, and I just you and your wife and son really made that a very memorable experience for my wife and I as well, and so it was just a really great time. So I mean, I take that to heart anytime I think about being cordial and being supportive to other makers. Is I want to emulate the way that you made me feel then, especially with as prestigious as you are as a maker. You are. I mean, you're one of the greatest living knife makers, according to Steve Shackleford. So, for you to spend the time with me and everything, it was just a humongous honor.
Well, we enjoyed it thoroughly. So people are people, and if you get to know them, you learn to love them, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one thing that I think a lot about, and I don't really have a lot of historical examples of this, but when you're working with Bob, it seemed like you were a key figure to change the dynamic of how fit and finish was done inside of the shop. Would you agree or disagree? Because again, I don't have a lot of early Loveless examples, but my understanding was they were a little bit more crude. And when you came into the shop, your fit and finish had raised the bar with Loveless knives.
Well, that was, Hibben was polishing everything, and that was certainly a step up, which I learned to do pretty well. And Draper was a true craftsman. Not that Gil wasn't, but Draper he was a pilot. He had a little cub, and anything he had to have, he would just build it. So I learned an awful lot from Gil. I learned an awful lot from Hibben. I had a chance to learn a lot from Chappel, only in different ways, making the shop work and making things go there, and certainly grinding some of those grinds that he drew up. That was a different world, and I could never do it as good as him. He knew what the blade had to be, and he would just make that machine turn it out. Uh, Between leaving Loveless and getting going, I worked with a little bit with Buster, who let me use his shop, and we went to a knife show in Vegas. I had my first own table. Buster did things like Hibben and Draper, but he did them mythically. he he was Harvey Draper on steroids as far as if he needs it, yeah, I'll just make it. I don't care, you know. And every day or every knife I make, I use some techniques out of every one of those men's. The time I had with them, whether it's fitting a guard or soldering a guard or assembling a handle or grinding a double grind or shaping a handle like this or that, or Loveless probably had the most influence, but Buster had some techniques that I still use and appreciate. So it's fun to go through a day, and as you're working on this knife, you're thinking about that man that taught you how to do this. I appreciate every one of them. And A.G. Russell, without him, I'd still be in Spokane or Manti. I don't know. He's the one that pushed the button that got the College of Knife Making into high gear. I was just blessed to have these men. You can't go to a college and learn to make a knife, even if it's a knife making school. Learn all the stuff I did. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but every one of them helped me. Loveless he took me in, what I think, what I'm saying when I say that. Respected me and my religion and my desire to make knives,
Mm-hmm.
and he was never, I'm better than you with me.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that is interesting because, I mean, there's a lot of people, I'm sure, that didn't find themselves able to tolerate Bob's personality so well at times. I used to work with I bought my knife shop from a knife maker that had been doing it for maybe 35 years or so. He was good friends with Clay Galt and Martin Pullen. And he was just he said, like knife shows were great, and it was nice to watch Bob hold court and talk to everybody, but you couldn't bring your wives around because of his language, and
True.
Different world we live in, because my wife probably wouldn't like mind those kind of things, and I don't know that I can really protect her too much against that in this day and age. But it's interesting to me, and really I think that I want people to understand that in knives, we have the ability to really be a community, and lift each other up and encourage each other. And a lot of that just has a lot to do with being gracious with your time and your knowledge, and being patient with each other. And that's something that I really appreciate about your time with phenomenal knife makers in their own right, and how that encourages you to push the bar on your own knives. So, Steve, I'd like your commentary on this knife on knifetreasures.com. It's one of your big bears that you did with Barry Lee hands, and I saw that it was going for $115,000. I'm interested primarily about how you got into working with Barry, and talk maybe a little bit more about these integral big bears, and how you feel about them. I mean, they're very intriguing to me. It seems like a lot of a process to go into for the knife, so the price tag does not surprise me either. But can you just give me a little bit more history on it?
Sure. Probably 5 or 6 art knife invitational shows back. It would have been pre 2010 or 2008 ish. As I recall, I called Steve Lindsay and said, would you be willing to do just one knife for me to take to the art AKI? And he said, I really can't. I'm so busy with these vices and air gravers that I'm sorry, but I wouldn't be able to help you. But I know someone who can, he highly recommended Barry Lee Hands, who at that time wasn't involved in knife engraving much. And so I called him, or he had Barry call me, I can't remember. And we talked, and at that very time, I had a customer looking for a little bit of work, and Barry said, I told him about that, and he said, oh, well, let's try that. And he just did a little bit of work on a classic fighter with pearl, and it was beautiful. And that evolved into taking I think it was a 6.5 inch, 7 inch fighter to an art knife show in San Diego, and everybody was impressed. There was one collector who could not believe the price Barry was getting for it, who eventually ended up being one of Barry's best customers. But from that little small sub hilt, I believe we did a big bear, all of them with mother of pearl. It wasn't integral, but we took that to another art show and it was well received. They weren't cheap. But I believe each show we went to, Barry's prices went up and mine went up dramatically because that was where we stepped into full integral big bears. And they were well received, and the reason there are only probably 3 total is because anyone who does an integral knife knows they're a lot of work. I didn't machine them; had a friend do those, but there was just a ton of work, and you have to finish the knife totally, and then the engraver would take it and do his engraving cuts, and then I'd get it back and send it to the heat treater, who obvi- obviously had to be careful with it or know what he was doing. And I think Paul Boss did one of those, and Peter's heat treat uh, did beautiful work with them. You know, the blade was finished down to final thickness, 25 30 thousandths, and everything was polished and the engraving cuts, so there was no room for any dings or banging it around with other blades. Then I'd get it back, and as an atmospheric controlled uh, knife blade, it comes back typically with a little haze on it, which has to be, and you can generally buff it off. Sometimes takes a little bit of sanding, but then I would clean them up and send the knife back to Barry without a handle installed. Well, no, back up. I would put the knife back together, put the pieces of pearl in place and the screws, and basically assemble it exactly as it was before it was heat treated. And then he would go ahead and put the gold inlay in, be it yellow or pink or green. And I believe in those knives there were over 100 of those little tiny diamonds installed in a lot of the flowers. Anyway, it's not a knife everybody that collects knives even wants. It's not a knife that everybody that collects knives can afford either. But they're certainly uh, groundbreaking for me, and they caused a bit of a. They were noticed, still are, I believe. It's great working with him. He's a marvelous talent. Worked with a lot of engravers, and every one of them it's been enjoyable. I just love engraving work. It'd be impossible for me to do, I think.
Yeah, engraving to me is just one of those facets of knife making that not everybody does and not everybody can do, not everybody can afford, but it really exemplifies, like, I guess the top end of what a knife can be when it has really well done engraving and inlays. So, but Barry, something I've appreciated about him is that he'll show up to sometimes fairly obscure knife shows and give commentary and encouragement and whatnot to knife makers. And I've been the recipient of that twice with him already. I didn't think he'd show up or look at my knives or things like that. So I've always enjoyed our interactions. So
He's good to get along with, and he's very knowledgeable about knives and guns and a lot, most anything. Uh, Not to say that other engravers are any less They all have their own way of work and their own way of working with people, and from Fracassi to Warenski to oh, excuse me. Right now, I can't remember any of my engravers. Joe Mason, Lee Griffiths, or some of those earlier Italian engravers. And the U.S. engravers, there's a lot of talent out there. So that knife has a little bit of history behind it, and I'm glad I did it, but I don't think I'll be doing any more.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of work.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, when I was talking to you at Blade Show Atlanta in 2021, was it? Yeah, 2021. You talked about that being one of your last knife shows, but like, are you semi-retired, retired? Like, what exactly are you doing with your knife life now?
I'm officially retired as far as the U.S. government's concerned, but I can do anything I want as far as making money, and I still want to make knives. I've always said I'll make knives till I can't. My wife tells everybody, "Oh, he goes to shop every day," but not for very long. And it takes me a long time to make a knife these days. But people that order, I don't take orders. I'll take someone's name, and with them knowing that I don't have a delivery date, and I'll do it when I can, if I can. I have 20 or 30 maybe on that list. And, in days of old, I was just looking at days, some 1995 records. I was making 80 or 90, 70 to 90 knives a year. Now I make 20 maybe.
Yeah, I get that. So what is a traditional drop point hunter cost from you these days?
I start at 2,000.
It's fair deal.
And that's with my Carta and stainless fittings and 1 CPM.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Mammoth and some of the handle materials are getting crazy. Stag used to be. I remember Draper paying $2.50 for a set of Stag, and I haven't bought some for so long, and I don't need any more. They're probably $100 plus these days.
Oh yeah. Even a Stag roll. I've seen some like Randall quality Stag rolls that are going for $250 plus.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean the Stag market's changed, especially since the Stag embargo has gone in place in India. So.
Oh yeah, and it's so hard to get good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and Mammoth. I mean, especially with all the stuff that's gone on with Russia and Ukraine and everything, it's really stopped up the export pipes with Mammoth and all the dredging stuff that they were doing. So those prices are getting. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting how you go from like $2 or $3 for a really good set of Stag up to $250 for, I mean, good Stag, but it's not like insane popcorn, not like you could see.
No.
I have some vintage. Vintage Stag from probably the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, and like the comparison is just not there. It's like a phenomenal Stag.
Yeah.
Maybe one day I'll make something out of it, but I only have a few pieces, so.
Yeah, do it. Make somebody happy. If only yourself.
Yeah, maybe I'll make something for myself. But one of the things that I like to ask everybody who comes on is, if there's like some type of advice that you can give to new and and upcoming makers, just based on your vast experience and everything, what would that be? Like any words of wisdom?
Well, as in years gone by, I would say don't quit your day job. I used to say, if you're gonna make knives, plan on 3 years till you get paid anything. You have to just give a lot of them away or sell them for very low prices, and which is not a bad thing because if you sell it for anything, you're getting paid to learn how to do it. Uh, Patience is great. You're not going to sell any knives if you think you're so good that you can get $1,000 for a hunter right now, or 2,000 or whatever. If you get $100, you're pretty well paid for your work, especially since you're being paid to do the work. If you can find a friend or a knife maker who will let you watch him, that'll be a drastic help. I'm to the point I can't do that anymore. I'm not in the shop every day, really, and less patient than I used to be. And that equipment is deadly, It's a different world than when Hibben started us guys. We could have cut off a finger and gone to the doctor and got it fixed. And that'd pretty much be it. These days, you get sued for everything you have. Maybe I'm being too grumpy about it, but
No, I mean, you're right. I mean, if in these days, if you're inviting people into your shop, you either take a real risk or you have to carry liability insurance, which makes it, which makes it a humongous endeavor, because even if you're running a small, like, sole proprietorship business, to maintain insurance and everything on it, in addition with all the other shop costs, I mean, it can get expensive just to be a hobby,
yeah. Anyway, there are guys who offer knife making classes. And they're not cheap, but if you want quality work, it's worth the cost. It'll save you years of experimentation. I haven't met many knife makers that don't welcome newcomers into the business, whatever stage they're in, whether they're brand new or they've been making knives for a year or so or whatever. It's still a good group of men, women, organizations. It's not like it used to be in many ways, but I suspect the small clubs are probably still like that to some degree, but the bigger organization you get, the less personal it becomes, I think. Lifelong friends can be a result of knife making just because you're involved with people, great people. There are lots of videos out. I used to have video, but got to the point where the producer wasn't making them anymore, so that's kind of down the tubes.
Yeah. Do you still own the rights to that, or like who owns the rights to your video that you made?
I had the copyright, but I don't have the record anymore.
Oh yeah.
So I could loan a copy out maybe, but that I can't sell them, and I don't have copies. I just have a link. So business gets involved, and when things happen.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's something that, like, we Chris Crawford and I founded this podcast together, and he does a lot of videos with other makers and shares royalties and does the distribution and everything like that. And I can imagine that he's encountered quite a bit of how to finesse all that, where it's fair for everybody involved, and he can maintain the integrity of the videos and whatnot. So,
Yeah.
you know, and just about everything in this craft. I mean, we all age out at some point in time, so it kind of becomes difficult when you're talking about videos that are made, 15, 20 plus years ago, still being like who even remembers who has the copyright and who has permission to share what and everything. But I get that.
As far as new makers go, if you can certainly get to shows, you can learn anything you want there from anybody you ask virtually. How do you do this? How do you do that? There's a few that think they have the best secret in the world they won't share, but not many. That's probably one of the best things you can do. You can talk to those who do the classes at many knife shows and get that hookup done, or find out what the best video is, or if they're available, and you can make a friend who's be glad to show you everything you want to know too. Don't be afraid to ask. If they say no, that there's a table next to him.
Well, that's something for everybody listening. Don't inundate Steve with a bunch of unqualified questions, but especially when it comes to how to do certain operations on Loveless style patterns and everything. I've picked your brain a few times, and when you're talking to somebody who is probably made more of those things than anybody. It's always good to get the information from the horse's mouth on exactly what needs to be done in order to get a historical representation of the blades, right?
Sure.
So, are you still open for people to chat with you online if they have specific questions about those things?
I'm not hoping for it because I'm not a very fast typer, but I never turned anybody down, I don't think. There are great guys that I've worked with, John Young or Ricardo Velarde or Mitch Jenkins, or Europe. There's Paki, he just does pictures now, but Charlie Benica, that are, his knives are the best of the best in the way he does them. It's exciting whenever I see one of those guys' works or some of their work. So, any serious question, I'd be happy to talk to them. But I don't have, not for hours.
No. So qualifier: be respectful of his time. Don't ask unqualified questions, and he might take a while to respond to it. Because I mean, even when I talk to you online, I just start the ticker, and I'm like, "When was the last time I got a response from you on something?" And sometimes it's many days.
And
But
I'm 74, so I might even just forget about you until I run across the email or the text. So,
yeah, something
no
like that. Yeah, I think everybody has to treat you with a little bit of grace. You definitely have you have your retirement to enjoy, right? I mean, like if people need to stop talking to you all the time about knives and maybe about camping or one of the other many facets of retirement you're enjoying.
Family, grandkids. Boy, thinking of the Blade magazine and Knives magazine, as well as others. They go into some great detail and specifics sometimes. Uh, don't let those things go by. There are some books that are quite well done. I'm being encouraged to make another video that I can handle by myself, as far as distribution and everything instead of counting on somebody that decides they're not going to pay you royalties and decides they're not going to make it anymore. Like
Yeah.
that. But glad to talk to people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd encourage you. Here's the deal with it's the same concept with like podcasting, right? There are so many aspects of technology that make it really obtainable to do your own publishing work with books and written word and recording and
Sure.
distribution with videos. So if you have the time and you can even just collect all the raw footage and then have somebody edit it, or gets one of your kids to edit or something like that, then you can really easily set it up and they just call it putting it behind like a paywall, so somebody has to buy the individual piece. So I mean, you ever get interested in any of that stuff, talk to Chris Crawford, because he has some infrastructure type of setups where you could pick his brain on it. But I mean, especially if you're making long videos, then it's one thing. But if you're breaking up certain operations and doing smaller tutorials and stuff, you could do that and kind of pass that knowledge along.
Sure.
But it's definitely way more obtainable now than it used to be, where you have a long production cycle to get anything done, and then have to burn CDs or whatever.
Oh yeah. Well, we have that ability in our family as far as making a video. No problem at all. Of course, these days the kids in high school have that ability.
Yeah, it's amazing what you can do on your phone alone.
Oh yeah.
Well, Steve, I'm sure you have a life to get back to. I really, man, it means a lot to me that you spent the time talking to me and giving these words of advice and some of your history to the listeners.
I was going to mention,
you're more than yeah.
Take any knife advice you can get. Sorry to interrupt you, but this thought just came to mind. I have a nephew once removed, or second nephew, I don't know, Chad Nell. He came up and he wanted to make knives, and he was doing a great job with straight knives. And I don't know if he ever makes a straight knife anymore. He's evolved or gone the route, and he makes super liner locks. I'm not making a Hibben knife anymore at all, but every knife I make is got Hibben in it. And you don't decide I'm just going to make Loveless knives, period, because you're stunting your growth. Take whatever you can get, I guess, as far as knife business and knife practices, and thank the Lord for the blessings He gives you, because none of it's you, it's all Him. And I appreciate you taking all this time. We're over time probably right now.
No, it's as long as it takes. That's as much time as we dedicate to it on these things. So I really appreciate it. I mean, that's when I think about that type of advice, I don't just take experiences even from knife makers and advice. I take it from machinists that I admire, and in jewelry, and my experiences in there, and some of the work that I even do in IT on how I lay out certain processes. Like your cross disciplinary experience helps a lot, and I think that as you're learning and you're trying to apply it to your individual process, it's important. So I mean, I learned things from a lot of guys that are more machinist minded, but they're knife makers.
Sure.
Or ones that they're in art knives and I guess the aesthetic, and some are in fit and finish and whatnot more than others. And those moments where they can share with me like little tidbits of how they think about something really just opens my brain to how I can apply that in my own shop, and it's invaluable to me.
Dorothy used to call that building categories when teaching kids. Doesn't matter what you put in there, it's going to be useful sometime, somewhere. If you put good stuff in, you'll be glad it's there. When you'll be doing this job, and the thought will come to you, God, this would be a lot easier if I did it the way Buster told me 20 years ago, And we're thinking along the same line, but I'll be quiet. Appreciate you. You're doing a good thing, Uh, Jim Stormberger, I told you he's writing a history, and I don't know if you've talked to him, but that will be invaluable in time, both of your works.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I when he gets back in country, so they have the Solvang show, and then he's going to be out in, I think, Indonesia for a few months.
He loves it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so when he gets back, we're going to try to sync back up, and I imagine I'm going to have multiple episodes where I'm trying to pick his brains, but we'll just have to see how all that plays out. But yeah, he's on my list too. I'd like to get DeLon on at some point if she has time. And, a lot of other people, it's just like there's only so much time to schedule time, and it's mostly being respectful of your time. So we'll see how this goes. Like, Lord willing, I'll be able to have all you makers on and get to spend some time to share you with the world. But I'm definitely always looking for more opportunities to record things and ask questions, and at least play the fool, so that way I can ask questions that maybe everybody else wants to know as well.
That's important, if you already know everything about making knives, and that's all you can talk about is the end result. It's not going to help Johnny with his brand new grinder do much. That's stuff that will help everybody. Appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate it. And, if you ever want to hop on any other time, you're more than welcome to.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Take care.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. Remember that you are loved, and God bless.